The first blow didn't land on her skin, it landed on the silence. And from that silence, the city would never return. It started like a normal weekend shift: crowds, heat, bad tempers. Downtown was bloated with events, food trucks, a junior martial arts expo, a charity run. Security was stretched thin, tension hanging in the air like static before a storm. Near one corner of the square, a temporary barricade had been set up by two patrol cops managing crowd control. One of them, Officer Delaney, had a temper like dry grass under sun. He wasn't built for pressure. But pressure came anyway. A teenage girl, maybe 16, stood just on the wrong side of the tape. Her backpack was open, a water bottle visible inside. She looked calm, too calm maybe, and something about her posture got under Delaney's skin. He told her to move. She didn't hear. He shouted. She blinked. She reached for her bag, and that was enough. Delaney stepped forward and slapped the bottle from her hand. The second slap wasn't aimed at the bottle. It hit the side of her face with an open palm. A sudden, brutal reaction disguised as law. The girl stumbled. Her sunglasses fell. One lens cracked, her voice caught in her throat. Not from pain, from disbelief. Around them, a small crowd froze. Phones rose. Cameras rolled. Time slowed. And one man, standing 3 booths down by a chilly truck, didn't move at all. Jason Statham watched with absolute stillness. His right hand was already clenched before the slap landed. But it wasn't rage that ran through him. It was focus. The girl's name was Eliza, and she was his daughter. Jason Statham hadn't come as a celebrity or a fighter. He was just trying to spend the afternoon in peace, watching Eliza show off the moves she'd been learning at Seagal's community dojo. Steven Seagal had been manning the booth beside her, signing posters, chatting with instructors. He didn't see the slap. But he saw Jason Statham's eyes the moment it happened. And that was enough. Jason Statham walked calmly across the plaza. People moved without being told. Phones stayed raised, but mouths went quiet. Even the DJ near the stage cut the music halfway through a beat. Jason's boots made a slow, grounded rhythm on the pavement. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply arrived. Officer Delaney stood over Eliza with a hand still half raised. That hand dropped quickly when Jason Statham stepped beside her. Eliza tried to speak, but Jason gently touched her shoulder. He didn't need her words. He looked at the welt forming on her cheek, then looked at Delaney. One glance. It wasn't rage, it was revelation. The crowd knew. Delaney didn't, not yet. Steven Seagal arrived behind them, silent as a shadow, wearing a black denim jacket and shades. He looked at Eliza, then at Jason Statham. He nodded once. That was it. Delaney finally realized something was wrong. He stepped back, reached for his radio. But the crowd had already begun to murmur. Is that Statham? Wait, that's his kid, someone whispered. Oh, this guy's done. The second officer, a younger recruit, dropped his headset and backed away from Delaney's side. Jason Statham didn't touch the cop. Not yet. He just stepped forward, standing between Delaney and Eliza. Delaney fumbled for protocol, tried to justify it, said something about compliance and threat perception. Jason didn't blink. Behind them, Seagal crossed his arms, and Delaney finally saw who he was dealing with. Security rushed in, a mall guard, an event volunteer, an off-duty paramedic, all useless, because the air had already shifted. The video clip hit TikTok within 90 seconds. 15 million views in 2 hours. Jason Statham standing between a bruised teenager and the man who struck her. Steven Seagal a few feet back, arms folded like a sentry. Delaney disappeared into a patrol vehicle as backup swarmed. He thought it was over. He thought he had survived. But this wasn't the kind of story that ends at the scene, because the damage wasn't to flesh, it was to perception. And the moment you lay a hand on Jason Statham's daughter, in public in front of him, the rules of consequence rewrite themselves. Later that evening, Jason and Eliza sat in silence on the rooftop of a downtown hotel. She hadn't spoken since they left the square. Her cheek was already swollen, but it wasn't the pain that hurt. It was the shock. Jason didn't try to explain it away, didn't offer cliches. He just sat there beside her, let the silence speak. A wind passed over them. Far off, sirens moved through the city. Steven Seagal joined them a few minutes later, no shoes, just socks. He handed Eliza a small bag of frozen peas. Jason gave a nod. Steven sat without a word, and for the next 10 minutes not a single voice rose. Because when everything's been said, there's power in quiet. But power doesn't stay still for long. That night, Jason Statham made one call, not to a lawyer, not to a producer, not even to a friend. He called a man in internal affairs, a man who owed him a favor, a man who didn't forget the mission they once shared overseas. He said 4 words and hung up. Delaney's record was clean on paper, but paper burns, and Jason Statham had already lit the match. By the next morning, the footage had spread like gasoline fire. News anchors didn't narrate the clip, they just played it, looped it. Let silence fill the space between each slap and Jason Statham's slow approach. A war of perception had begun, and the badge was losing. Jason Statham wasn't interested in media wars. He didn't post, didn't press, didn't respond. Instead, he was in an underground gym on the edge of the industrial zone, bare-fisted, pounding into a heavy bag until the chains above it cried. Eliza sat in the corner, watching. Her face was calmer now, but her silence wasn't gone. She kept staring at her knuckles, like she was trying to calculate strength. Steven Seagal leaned against a pillar, arms folded, no shoes again. He didn't speak either, not because there was nothing to say, but because the storm hadn't passed yet. It was circling. Back downtown, Officer Delaney was being pulled apart in every direction. Public affairs wanted him to take a leave. The union whispered about protecting him, but no one was defending the action. And yet, behind closed doors, the higher-ups weren't planning punishment. They were planning cover. In their view, if Jason Statham didn't file a charge, then no crime had taken place. They could reframe the incident as a miscommunication. They could push the footage down, cycle it out of the news cycle with distractions. What they didn't know, what they couldn't measure, was Jason Statham's reach. Because Jason Statham didn't need a court. He needed only one conversation. That afternoon, a retired intelligence operator flew into the city. He had no bags. He carried only a folded dossier marked with a name, Delaney Troy R. He didn't go to the hotel. He went straight to a private residence, one owned by an old contact. That contact was Jason Statham. They didn't shake hands, they just nodded. The file was exchanged, and nothing was said. Inside the folder was everything that mattered. Prior disciplinary warnings Delaney had dodged through internal connections. A record of unfiled complaints from citizens who'd stopped following through. A sealed statement from an officer who had quietly transferred 3 years ago. It wasn't illegal, it was truth. Jason Statham didn't intend to expose it publicly. He intended to use it surgically. That evening, Delaney met with his internal contact, a captain in the disciplinary bureau. He walked in confident, walked out pale. Because someone had anonymously placed that same dossier on the captain's desk an hour before Delaney arrived, signed only with an S. No note, no threat, just paper. But paper, when timed right, can do what fists can't. Back at the gym, Jason Statham sat with Eliza at the lockers. She finally broke her silence, not with tears, with a question. She asked why he didn't hit the cop back. Jason didn't answer right away. He just stared at the ground, breathing. Then, after a long pause, he said something short, something quiet, and she nodded, because she understood. It wasn't about rage, it was about precision. That night, Steven Seagal took Eliza to his dojo. Jason Statham stayed behind, not alone but focused. He had one last step to take, one final conversation. He went to visit an old contact in the city council. A woman who owed him not a favor but respect. They sat on a rooftop garden far above the city's noise. He handed her the dossier, told her the time had come to clean the precinct, not for vengeance, for legacy. Because the next kid who stood still and got hit might not be his daughter. She didn't argue, didn't politic. She simply took the file and made a phone call. And just like that, the gears started to turn. The next morning, Officer Delaney was told to turn in his badge pending investigation, not by a captain, by the deputy mayor. Internal Affairs showed up with media cameras. By coincidence, Delaney tried to defend himself, but no one was listening anymore, because Jason Statham didn't need to raise his voice. The world had already heard the message. By the end of the week, 3 other officers from Delaney's squad were placed under review. A quiet fund was started for community trauma training. Eliza received a private apology letter from the precinct, unsigned. Jason Statham never showed it to anyone. He kept it folded in his jacket pocket, untouched, because it wasn't about forgiveness, it was about proof. Meanwhile, a photo had begun to circulate. Jason Statham and Steven Seagal standing outside the dojo with Eliza between them. She's smiling slightly, her hair pulled back. A soft bruise still visible but fading behind them. The dojo banner flaps in the wind. The photo wasn't staged. It just happened. Someone in the community snapped it without asking, posted it with the caption, "That cop hit the wrong daughter." It became a symbol, not of vengeance. Of presence. Jason Statham didn't respond to the post, but he did return to the dojo the next day, not to teach, not to fight, to listen. He sat in on a beginner's class, watched quietly as kids worked through their first katas. One of them, a shy boy with glasses, looked up at Jason during a break and asked if he'd ever lost a fight. Jason Statham smiled, not because the answer was yes, but because the question had power. Upstairs, Steven Seagal watched from the balcony. He didn't interrupt. He knew the world had already gotten its punishment, and sometimes the most brutal justice is the silence that follows a slap. Eliza didn't return to school right away, not because she was afraid, but because she wanted time. Time to reset, to train, to stand up again on her own terms. Jason Statham didn't argue. He gave her space, but never distance. Steven Seagal made room for her at the dojo, one-on-one. No press, no cameras, just structure, sweat, and silence. The media noise kept building, but inside that quiet place a different kind of strength was growing. And it was almost time to let it out. Officer Delaney's exit had changed the surface of things, but beneath it, in the rooms that mattered, there was still rot. The department hadn't apologized publicly. The chief hadn't spoken. They were hoping the noise would fade. But Jason Statham wasn't here to let them off that easily. Not after what they allowed to happen. Not after the bruise that sat just below his daughter's eye for 5 straight days. It started with a memo. One that Jason Statham personally handed to a city councilman, backed by legal language drafted by 2 friends from his previous life in the security world. It laid out every missed disciplinary flag in Officer Delaney's history, cross-referenced by precinct. Tied to cases that had quietly vanished, names redacted but traceable. It wasn't just pressure, it was leverage. The councilman didn't ignore it. He brought it into a closed-door meeting 3 days later. The result? An emergency vote to launch an external review committee on police misconduct. No one saw it coming, and behind that blindside was Jason Statham. Meanwhile, Eliza began showing up at the dojo earlier, stayed later. She didn't talk about the slap. She didn't need to. It had already turned into something else, a drive. Steven Seagal trained her alone in the early hours. Jason Statham watched from a distance. One morning, she finally beat the wooden form exercise in under 40 seconds. The dojo timer buzzed. She looked toward her father. Jason Statham didn't clap, he nodded. That was enough. Later that day, Jason Statham was invited unofficially to a meeting at the city's ethics office. They wanted to know what he intended to do next, whether he planned to escalate. Jason showed up alone. No assistant, no lawyer. Just a plain gray jacket and eyes that saw through walls. He said nothing aggressive, but the words he used painted futures they couldn't ignore, ones where every buried complaint, every delayed response, every internal whisper would come to light. He wasn't bluffing. He didn't know how. 1 week later, the department held a public conference. The chief didn't apologize directly, but he stepped down. In his place, the city appointed someone new, someone not from inside, an outside veteran known for cleaning house. Jason Statham didn't speak at the press event, but he was there at the back of the crowd, arms folded, head lowered slightly. Steven Seagal stood beside him still. Eliza too. No cameras caught their faces. But the silence, that silence was louder than the microphones. By now the video had circled the globe. Hashtags shifted from anger to admiration. #Stand like Statham trended for 2 days. It wasn't just about a man stepping in. It was about a father choosing not to use violence when he had every reason to. The restraint was the message. The follow-through was the lesson. Eliza was eventually invited to speak at a local community forum on youth and justice. She turned it down. Instead, she volunteered to assist at the kids program at Seagal's dojo. On her first day, a young girl with braces asked her if she was scared when it happened. Eliza answered honestly, yes, and then she said something that made Jason Statham, standing outside by the entrance, close his eyes for a long moment. She said, "I was scared, but when I saw him walking toward me, I remembered I didn't have to be." The little girl smiled, and that was it. That evening, Jason Statham and Steven Seagal sat on a bench outside the dojo, the sun nearly down. Neither of them said much. The noise of city protests had quieted, the press had moved on, but the people hadn't forgotten. A corporate donor pulled funding from the precinct's union. A major sponsor dropped its city contract. A lawsuit was quietly filed, not by Jason Statham, but by two families who'd seen Delaney walk free before. The department's financial toll was climbing. Projected damages, settlements, and loss of funding. Estimated $18 million. Jason Statham didn't ask for a dime. He wanted change, and it came, piece by piece. The final echo came at a public town hall. Jason Statham was asked to speak, not about violence but about what comes after. He walked to the mic slowly, looked around the room, and told them what mattered, that protection isn't just about muscle. It's about standing between what harms and what deserves peace. It's about knowing when to act and when to withhold action, and that his daughter taught him more about strength than he ever knew. Then he walked offstage. And the applause didn't stop. Back at home, Eliza placed the letter, the unsigned apology, inside a box, not to hide it, to remember it, because she hadn't been broken. She had been rebuilt, tougher, quieter, sharper. And her father, Jason Statham, didn't need the world to fear him. He needed it to understand what happens when you cross the line. And the man waiting on the other side isn't just a fighter, but a father with purpose.